Hello, and welcome to a stroll through some aspects of our local history through textile fragments. I was recently intrigued to read of a strange method of estimating the fertility of soil using underpants. Soil scientists found the quickest way to check the varying fertility in a garden was to bury identical pieces of cotton over the area, leave for a set time, and then dig them up again. The most convenient source of cotton was packs of underpants. The more holes in the cotton underwear over time, the more fertile the spot. Of course, archaeologists have known this for years. For this reason, textiles, unlike stone, bone, metal, and so on, do not survive. Only under very particular circumstances do bits of cloth survive through the ages. Ironically, these circumstances of survival are very similar to those for getting rid of the body in the most lurid of murder fiction: smothering, drowning, burning, and the dreaded acid bath. So, if ancient textile is so hard to find, how do we know what it was like? Objects associated with the production of fibre, be it animal-based, like wool, silk, camel, goat, hair, or plant-based, like flax, hemp, nettle, or latterly cotton, can fill in the blanks for us. Tools like combs, shears, shuttles, loom weights, and weaving tablets, as we'll see later, may be preserved, as well as buttons, cloak pins, and so on. Then there are written sources and depicted sources like tombstones, sculptural stones, and murals. One of the most exciting finds for an archaeologist is a piece of pottery. There is more than a chance of finding the imprint of the maker's fingers and nails along the rim or forming a pattern on the outside surface. This is not an ancient pot. It was a trial pot made during one of our prehistoric workshops at Castle Hill. Sometimes, if you turn the pot over, the authentic clay pot will still have the impression of the woven mat or piece of fabric the wet clay shape was set on to be fired. A Neolithic pot dating from 2500 BC, found on Rousey on Orkney a few years ago, had the imprint of a woven mat, and this summer's excavations at the Neolithic site, the Ring of Brodgar, revealed a pottery shard with the marks of woven cloth. Moving on to the Bronze Age, 3000 BC to 1200 BC, we come to this image, courtesy of Live Science, of a ball of stout thread found at Must Farm near Peterborough in the Fenland, a very wet area. It had been wound round a spindle awaiting use. The twine had survived because there had been a fire in the settlement in the marshes. The archaeologists said it was carbonized, then waterlogged. In terms of our murder analogy, burnt, then drowned. The oldest piece of Scottish woven wool material was discovered in Perthshire in a Bronze Age site, a man-made island home. And the image is copyright of National Museum of Scotland, so I've done a little sketch of it. But do look at their website and you get the actual picture. It shows a late Bronze Age fragment. Other Bronze Age discoveries were plant-based fragments, flax, hemp, and nettle, used to plug the sockets of a spear, razor, and knife. where the salts in the metal had acted to preserve the textile. The object found in Sheshadar on Lewis is so strange that it can only be called a thing. It was a mixture of several types of fabric craft weaving, plaiting, felting, and adorned with tails for decorations or for fastening. Its use is a complete mystery. Was it spiritual or practical? Was it a leg covering, a mask, or even a knee pad? With the Iron Age comes the backup of the written word. This is a piece of writing written in Scottish Welsh, the language spoken by the early settlers in Dunedin, the future Edinburgh, and it was obviously written by a woman. It's a kind of lullaby, and it's very, very similar to the familiar nursery song by Baby Bunting. It's a bit of a cop-out in this little presentation because, in fact, it was made of animal fur and not textile at all. But it does show that over the years, soft animal fur, in this case pine marten fur, was used for keeping a child warmly wrapped. The Orkney hood can be seen nowadays in the National Museum of Scotland. It was found in the 1990s, but it dates from 615 or thereabouts. It survived because it was buried in a peat bog. Jackie Wood, the wonderful archaeologist, experimental archaeologist, built herself an authentic loom in order to replicate the work done on this hood. After much puzzlement, she discovered that at least 4 people had worked on it, and the quality of thread used suggests a high status garment. It's been recycled from an adult garment to be used by a child. Nearer to home now, as a result of a dig in Fressick, these cloak pins were found. Textile archaeologists can determine from the size of the pin and the sharpness of its point the nature of the material that the cloak was made of. Most of these, if you look carefully, look like little hands, and for this reason they're called hand pins. They look like little fists. Cloaks then were secured with pins, continue to be for some time, because the first buttons are detected in about the 13th century when there was a guild of button makers. And they weren't used for closures, they were used for ornament. This illustration shows a Viking woman as she was envisaged. It also shows the kind of things which do survive in especially burial sites or archaeological sites which have been excavated. Stone spindle whorls, for example, and clay or stone weaving tablets, which used by the Viking lady and in the Norse culture would produce these intricate strips of braiding to decorate gowns and edges of tunics. This is the logo of our local rugby club, and they have chosen a Viking warship or longship. It reminds us of the mighty sails which powered the Viking ships. It's estimated that the fleeces of 1,000 sheep were needed to make one of these mighty sails. Fragments of Viking sails were discovered in a Norwegian church steeple. They were woven in about 2 feet strips, fulled, that is the equivalent of walking the Tweed, joined by a sailmaker, and treated with fish oil, tar from fir trees, and sheep's tallow to make the strips wind and waterproof. We know from archaeology and literature of the importance of cloth to the Vikings. Traces of mainly wool, but also silk and even gold thread have been found in high-class burials. Wadmal, a type of thick coarse felted cloth, was used as a medium of exchange and accepted as currency in Shetland and other Norse territories. Textile imprints have been identified on metal buckles where the cloth of a belt or garment has disintegrated, but the pattern has remained as the metal changed chemically over time. Such imprints found on ladies' brooches allow textile archaeologists to deduce, for example, coarse fabric for undergarments and finer linen on top. This is the Viking lady's brooch found in the ruins of an Iron Age broch at Castle Hill, dating to around 900. One of a pair, this one is in the National Museum of Scotland. When it was received, the report said that traces of textile were discernible on the reverse. On to the 17th century. We're leaping through time here. Conditions in the bog at Quintfall at Leith were ideal for the preservation of the body of a man who met a violent death around the 1600s, and also his clothes. They have been closely analysed and a pattern has been made. A similar outfit was discovered in Shetland, allowing a better view. Was he perhaps a soldier? It's hard to say, as uniforms as such were no different from ordinary clothes. Our Quintfall man was wearing 2 jackets and 2 pairs of trousers, suggesting that underwear consisted of old clothes. His suit was brown and his hat blue. The cap or bonnet had a drawstring round it so that it fitted any head. Apparently, the vestige of this can still be seen inside a bowler hat as a tiny bow and the tails of a soldier's cap or Glengarry. This is an illustration of much the same time of Scottish mercenaries, although they are called Irish because they were all wrapped together as Celtics. They fought with the troops supporting Gustavus Adolphus at the Battle of Cringillan in 1612. Caithness mercenaries were raised by John Sinclair and they were involved in a terrible massacre. We've now reached the 18th century. Sir John Sinclair of Ulster raised the Caithness Highlanders as a fighting force. This recruiting poster shows that as well as a bounty being paid for each man recruited, a plaid was given to each man. I would love to see one of these. I'm sure they're still stashed away in someone's attic. Although they signed up for service in Ireland only, many ended up fighting with the army in Spain and Portugal against Napoleon. The government of the time was offering grants for introducing new industries, or manufactures as they were called. These included fishing and linen, among others. James Trail of Castle Hill was one of those who got into production. This is his linen mill, which used the same source as his corn mill, which you may know beside the sea at Castle Hill. It was all very well offering grants for new manufactures, but it did change society. Interfering with aspects of the textile industry could have unforeseen results. The promotion of linen over traditional wool led to illness, as fine linen didn't provide the same warmth and protection, leading to consumption and lung diseases among the poorer classes. Friedrich Engels noticed that in Manchester women were employed in the linen mills, leaving men at home to cook and mind the children. In France, Marie Antoinette brought the traditional silk industry in France to its knees by championing fine cotton and loose gowns. Everyone wanted to follow her. She was a fashion icon. A collection of letters written to and from the Sinklers of May give us an insight into textiles at the time. In this one, Miss Jean is asking to borrow heckles for splitting and straightening the flax fibres before she can spin it into linen thread. She says she has only 2 stones left to do, £32. As another letter in the collection talks of the purchase of Flemish flaxseed, the landowning ladies must have been growing it locally. The Earl of Caithness, from May, who died in a debtor's prison in Orkney in 1732, lived completely beyond his means, but continued to order the best cloth for his suits, even in jail. These embroidered samplers, which we have at Castle Hill, were sewn by Jane and Jessie Jack, aged 11, pupils in Crossroads Public School in the 1870s. Samplers were originally part of a girl's education to show her skills as a seamstress and therefore desirable wife. Adverts in the 1800s for the few schools in Thurso catering for girls emphasised the importance of needlework to make good wives for working men. The mention of Crossroads School is interesting, as its opening in 1872 closed the local schools of Ratter, Barrock, Scarfsbury and Broch. How did these children make the longer trip? On foot, pony and trap? There was no school bus at the time. My offering for the early 20th century is this photo of my father as an infant in 1909. I still have my grandmother's wedding dress and headdress, made of heavy lace. If you look closely, you'll see that my grandmother, holding the baby, one of the twin babies, is wearing a little lace collar too. My great-grandfather on the right was involved in the Ayrshire lace industry. In fact, he started to work in the cotton mill at the age of 8 in 1858. Children in factories played a vital role as they were small enough to crawl under the looms to mend broken fibres. Nowadays, we'd call it child exploitation. It did my great-grandfather no harm, however, as he pursued his education when he could and eventually became a manager. Here in Castletown at the same time, the local school teacher bemoaned the loss from school of boys from the age of 8 as they took jobs at the flagstone works. Her concern was not entirely altruistic, as her pay depended on the school roll numbers. You may well have one of these at home. These hand-embroidered silk cards were made during World War I by female refugees from Belgian and French war-ravaged villages. They were sold to troops to give women a little income. They are nearly all different. Among our collection at Castle Hill is one in its envelope addressed to Miss Bakey, Viewfirth, Main Street, Castletown. Another wartime memento, this time from the Second World War. Loaned to us by the Custer family, this linen tablecloth preserves the signatures of the RAF men, 150 in total, from 5 different nationalities, who maintained the communication mast on Durran Hill. They were given Caithness hospitality at the nearby farm run by the Custers, and many became firm friends, keeping up the friendship for years afterwards. My last historic object I found recently in the back of a drawer. It was my daughter's cloth nappy, some 45 years old. To me, it suddenly brought back all the paraphernalia of bringing up an infant in the 1970s. The terry nappy and its muslin interior, steeping nappy bucket with a lid, the nappy sand for sterilising, the safety pins, the plastic pants. All superseded, for better or for worse, by disposable nappies. History is all about people, what they do and what they think. The smallest piece of fabric can be a useful reflection of its time. Don't throw it away, tell someone else its story. So we started with underpants and finished with nappies. Let's hope you found the bits in between a little more enlightening.